life as a NEET versus life as a Wagie. I have plenty of experience with both lifestyles. I'm currently waging away at a car wash for $11 an hour plus tips, but prior to this job, I lived the NEET lifestyle for, I don't even know, 6 years, I think. And a long time ago, I actually had a pretty decent job as a engineer. So I've been a NEET and I've been a wage cuck at different income levels. So which is better, the NEET life or the employed life? There's pros and cons to both. So what I'm going to do is I made a list of differences between the two lifestyles, and we'll just go through it. And along the way, I will talk a bit about my personal experiences, but I'm also just going to be talking about NEET life and Wagie life in general, because my situation isn't really the norm. So let's get into it. The three main areas where life is different between NEET life and Wagie life are money, time, and social life. Let's start with money. The first difference, and probably the most obvious thing that anybody would think of first when you think about the NEET lifestyle versus the Wagie lifestyle, it's money. Obviously, if you're working a job, you're probably going to have more money available to you to spend on luxuries and fast food slop or whatever else you want to buy. But it does really depend, because if you were living the NEET life, living with your parents, and then you get some low-wage job and you move out on your own, you start renting an apartment or whatever, well, if you go from not paying any bills at your parents' place to having to pay for rent, utilities, car payment, internet, and everything else, then you might not even be keeping most of your earnings for yourself. So in that case, you might actually have more money to spend as a NEET, especially if your parents were giving you some sort of allowance. But even things like having a home-cooked meal for dinner versus having to spend 3 hours worth of your hard-earned wage bucks on some Taco Bell slop or whatever it is, the home-cooked meal is free and it's probably better. Like, it's better for you and it tastes better. So just because you're making money, that doesn't necessarily mean that your quality of life has improved. Now, in my case, I still live with my mom and I have not taken on any extra expenses since I've started working. So for me, I'm still getting all the benefits of living at home, but now I have some more money on top of that. So in my case, it feels like I have a lot of money now, even though I only make like $14 or $15 an hour, because it's $11 an hour plus tips. If you factor in the tips, it's probably about $15 an hour. Although that might go down soon because we are getting into the slow season now, apparently. But yeah, for me, I still don't pay any bills other than my phone bill and my student loan payment. And both of those combined, it's about $150 total each month. And I was already paying those, by the way, before I started working at the car wash. Because I do earn a little bit of money from YouTube, basically just enough to cover those bills. Most months, that's how much it is. But yeah, since I started working, I'm still living at home, and I still don't pay any bills other than the two I mentioned. And I guess I do pay for gas now occasionally, but that's almost negligible because sometimes my mom fills up the tank, sometimes I fill it up. Just depends who's driving at the time when we need to get gas, but it's like That's really not that much, at most like $50 a month, I think. So, Wagie life, the wage cuck life that I'm living currently, for me, it is a big improvement in terms of money. It's not enough for me to move out and support myself on my own. It's not even near that much. And that is a very important point to make. If the choice was between living at home as a NEET versus working my wage cuck car wash job and living on my own, then I would definitely choose to be NEET, because I don't make near enough to move out on my own. I don't make enough to support myself. I could maybe afford to rent some absolute roach-infested shithole apartment in the ghetto if I had roommates. But at that point, I might as well just live with my mom, She at least buys me food, and sometimes, occasionally, she'll cook something. And I doubt that any random roommates I'd be able to find are going to be cooking for me. So to even be worth it financially, to stop being NEET, you pretty much still have to leech off your parents anyways. To some extent, in some way, shape, or form, you still have to leech off your parents, even if you're living the wagey lifestyle. Unless you can get a job that pays at least $25 an hour or more, depending on where you live, of course. If you're in California or New York City or something like that, you probably need more like $40 an hour. But where I live, I think $25 an hour would be about the minimum that I would need to make to actually make it worth it for me to even start to consider moving out of my mom's house. So for most people, it might sound counterintuitive, but for most people, the NEET lifestyle is actually probably just as good financially as the wagey lifestyle. Unless you can still live at home and mooch off your parents, or however you want to say it. If you can still live at home while you're working, so you're kind of getting the benefits of the NEET lifestyle while still also getting the monetary benefit of waging away, then yeah, in that case, it's worth it. But otherwise, if you've got to move out on your own, then the wagey lifestyle is just not worth it. The NEET lifestyle is actually better. Now, I do also have the experience of having had a relatively high-paying job in the past. So I used to make about $60,000 to $70,000 a year. I started at around $60,000 a year and got closer to about 70 by the time I quit that job. And I lived in a big city in another state, so I wasn't living near my parents. I wasn't living near home. I didn't have any support from my family at all. I was 100% on my own. And this was about 10 years ago, almost, when I started that job. So that salary was a lot better back then. It's still not bad now, $60,000, $70,000 a year. That's, in most places, that's not bad. But back then, it was really not bad. I actually just plugged it into an inflation calculator just because I was curious. And apparently, $65,000 10 years ago is the equivalent of like $90,000 now. So if you adjust for inflation, I was making the equivalent of about $85,000 to $95,000 or something like that. I didn't even realize it was that bad, but yeah, apparently that's how the inflation calculation works out. So when I was working that job, it was okay. I guess ultimately it was probably better than the NEET life at my parents' house, although I guess that depends on your perspective. The NEET life is still better in some ways, but I'll get more into that later. But financially speaking, I pretty much was making more money than I even knew what to do with. I lived by myself in a small apartment, in a safe neighborhood. I was within walking distance to the train station, and I could walk to the gym. I did have a car just to drive to and from work, but I wouldn't have even needed the car other than that because, like I say, I was in a big city and I had all the stuff I need within walking distance of me. But yeah, my rent was about $1,000 a month. I'm sure that same place now is at least probably $1,500 a month. I haven't looked. I bet it's at least $1,500 a month now. And I had some other bills, electricity, internet, gas, and of course I had to buy my own groceries and everything. So I had all the regular bills that an adult wage slave is expected to pay to live their life. But with the amount I was earning, it was easy. I never had to worry about making the ends meet. I was able to save for retirement, making my maximum contributions. And it got to the point, I guess I just got bored or something, that it got to the point I started thinking like, hey, why don't I get into Bitcoin? Because it was like, I have all this extra money. I don't really care about nice cars and jet skis and stuff like that, so why don't I invest in something? So I thought, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, that's kind of the new big thing. So I've talked about that on this channel before. I'm not going to rehash the whole story here. But basically, I just ended up gambling away a lot of my money on Bitcoin. I lost a lot of money that way. It was really freaking stupid. Now, especially if you look at what Bitcoin is worth right now, it's worth over $100,000 for a single Bitcoin. So if I had not sold all my crypto, I would actually have a lot of money right now, but whatever. I guess it doesn't really matter. Either way, the point is, at a certain level of income, which I think I was past that threshold, at that point, the Wagie life is pretty nice from a financial standpoint. Like, I remember back then, I could eat out whenever I want. I could buy any new video games I want, any new video game console, a new gaming PC. I bought a new laptop that I didn't even really need. I bought a new 65-inch TV, which that actually wasn't as expensive as I thought it was going to be. I think it was like $600. But, trying to think about now making a luxury purchase, like just buying a new TV, that wouldn't even cross my mind now. But back then, when I was working that job, earning a pretty good living, I could just spend money like that and I didn't have to think about it. It didn't matter. It didn't affect the bottom line at all because I just was making enough money to do that. New video games and stuff like that was just a drop in the bucket. I literally did not even have to think about it. If I saw a game I wanted, $60, whatever it costs, I could easily just buy it. Now, I'm sure if I had been just really just going wild, buying a new game every single day, then yeah, I wasn't making enough for that, if that was the way that I lived my life. But for my tastes, I pretty much felt like I had as much money as I could ever possibly want. If I had wanted to buy a house or a nice car or some kind of big purchase like that, after a few years of working, I probably could have got a mortgage on a somewhat decent house, and maybe that would have been a good investment. It probably would have been at that time, but, I just never really thought about that much. And I've never really had very expensive tastes. I don't have super expensive hobbies. So for me, I felt like I was pretty much rich. I pretty much had as much money as I needed. So just talking about money, the Wagie life is better than the NEET life if you make enough money. Or if you're able to continue living at home while you work. so you don't have to pay any extra bills or anything like that, then the Wagie life is probably worth it in that case, if you're able to do that. But the other thing to consider, if you're like I am, and I think most NEETs are like this, where you just don't have expensive tastes. Like, if I was really into motorcycles and fast cars and designer clothes and all that, then the high income Wagie life would be more worth it to you if you care about that sort of thing. But, like I said, for me personally, I don't really care about all that expensive stuff. I don't have expensive tastes. The most expensive thing I ever wanted was a top of the line gaming PC, which even today, anything more than like $2,000-$3,000 for a gaming PC. I know it probably can get better up to like $5,000 or $6,000, but if you're spending $2,000 on a gaming PC, that's gonna be basically a top of the line PC. So that's really not a lot of money. Like it doesn't take a super high paying job to be able to afford that. But if your idea of a good time is buying a brand new motorcycle or a sports car or whatever, then yeah, the NEET lifestyle is probably not ideal for you if you have expensive tastes. So for me, yes, the money is better in the Wagie lifestyle. It is a bonus, but it's not that big of a bonus just because I don't have expensive tastes. And I guess when you get to a certain age and you start having age-related health issues, at that point, most people's perspective is going to change, I think. I think my own perspective will change when I start having age-related health issues. Because at that point, you're going to be a lot better off if you've been able to save for retirement. But that brings me to the next point I want to make, actually. For most NEETs, the options available are either don't work at all or work at a low-wage, miserable job for like $20 an hour if you're lucky. Probably more like minimum wage for most of us. So all this discussion of that high-paying job I used to have, even for me, like it's nice to think about, but that's not even an option for most NEETs. Realistically, if you are currently living the NEET lifestyle, you could probably find a job in a warehouse or something paying like $18 an hour. But the pay is so low for the amount of work that you'd be doing. Is it really worth it at that point? I think what it boils down to is if you have to move out, then no, it's definitely not worth it in that case. But if you can keep living at home with your parents and you're not going to have to take on any additional expenses, you're not going to have any more bills to pay, then in that case, whether or not it's worth it is still going to depend on your individual circumstances. But when you don't have any bills, those Wagie bucks do add up. You can get yourself a new gaming PC or something like that without having to think about it too much. You can buy yourself some new clothes when your pants get holes in them. So I'd say, monetarily speaking, I prefer the Wagie life that I'm living right now compared to my former NEET lifestyle. But that is only because I'm still living at home. So I'm actually kind of living a sort of hybrid NEET lifestyle. And the other thing too is my job isn't that bad. The pay sucks. It doesn't pay anything, but it's not as bad as if I was working at fast food or something. As far as what the actual work is. I pretty much just wash cars all day. I don't have to do any kind of customer service. I don't have to interact with customers much at all. Pretty much not at all. So the work is bearable. It's really not that bad. And the extra money is nice. And again, of course, If I had to move out, then it wouldn't be worth it because there wouldn't be any extra money because that would all immediately go toward bills. The next difference I want to talk about between the NEET life and the Wagie life is time and quality of life. I think most people would agree the biggest benefit of the NEET lifestyle is that all of your time is free time. You don't have to wake up to an alarm. You don't have to be at a certain place at a certain time. You don't have to go to work when you really just don't feel like it. If you want to wake up at 1 p.m. and play RimWorld for 7 hours straight, you can do that. Employed people talk about this concept known as work-life balance, but as a NEET, there's no balance there. You don't even have to think about that. It's just all life, no work. Or theoretically, that's how it is. So usually, I would say the NEET life is preferable to the Wagie life in terms of quality of life. But that is assuming your home life isn't absolutely horrible. It obviously depends. But in my case, for the past year, anytime that I'm at home, I have to take care of my 1-year-old cousin. So for any of you that are new to the channel, my cousin had a baby about a year ago, or more like a year and a half ago, I guess. And she pretty much just abandoned him. So my mom adopted the baby, and I pretty much act like the baby's dad. I take care of him. I do anything that a dad would normally be doing. And we haven't had him in daycare or anything. So for the most part, it's just been me here at home taking care of him most of the time, especially when my mom's at work. So I'm in a kind of unique situation where for me, it's like, if I quit my job, that wouldn't necessarily give me any more free time. Because most of the times I'm at work, if I wasn't there at work, then I would have to be watching the baby. Which is better than being at work. Don't get me wrong. I still do get some free time if I'm watching him, when he takes a nap, or even when he's awake. I'd rather be just spending time with him rather than washing cars. But it's still not exactly the trade-off you might be thinking. So the amount of free time I have, for me personally, it's actually not a big difference whether I was living the NEET life or I'm working this job that I'm currently working. It's really not that big a difference in terms of the amount of free time I have. But for most people, people that don't have a baby to take care of, the NEET life is obviously way better in terms of free time and quality of life. Although there are levels to this. Like if you're just working part-time, 20 hours a week or something like that, that's not that bad in terms of how much it impacts your free time. But if you're wage slaving away for like 60 hours a week, then yeah, obviously that's absolutely brutal. You pretty much have no free time at all at that point. So what's even the point? There's almost no amount of money that would make it worth it to me to work for 60 hours a week. Even if I like the job, my free time is more important than that. Now, while we're talking about quality of life and free time, there is something to be said about having too much free time. It really depends on your personality and your own personal preferences, but I think a lot of people would feel their best when they don't have unlimited free time. It varies from person to person, but I think most people would be at maximum life satisfaction if they do have something fulfilling to do for maybe 10 to 20 hours a week. And it is like 20 hours a week max, I think, for most people. Anything more than that, especially, you think about a standard 40-hour-a-week job. At that amount of hours, even if it's super fulfilling, you love your job and everything, 40 hours is just too much. That is not a good work-life balance. A little bit of work, a little bit of responsibility is good for most people, I think, because otherwise you get bored with everything and you have too much time to yourself to think about how depressed you are. So a little bit of work is probably the ideal for most people. So for general overall quality of life, I think that the Wagie life could potentially be preferable to the NEET life, but only if you have the right job. So practically speaking, in most cases, the NEET life is better because most jobs that you'd be able to get if you are currently a NEET, it's not going to be fulfilling work. It's probably going to suck. It's going to be a bad job. You're probably not going to find a good job that pays well and is fulfilling work and doesn't make you work too many hours. That's going to be tough to find that perfect job. So 99% of the time, the NEET life wins in terms of free time and quality of life. Okay, so now let's talk about social life, family, and reputation. In most cases, being a NEET sucks in terms of how people treat you and how your family thinks about you. And, it's probably the worst part about being a NEET, just that even if nobody says anything about it, you just know that everybody's looking down on you. Most people are not understanding of the situation at all. Nobody cares why you're NEET. Nobody cares to ask how you ended up living that way. People just assume that you are a lazy piece of shit. They don't care if you have other issues, you've got some kind of mental issues or autism issues that pretty much force you into the NEET situation. People don't care about that. They don't think about that. They just assume that you're lazy, and that's that. You're just a lazy scumbag. You like leeching off your parents. You're lazy, and that's why you live the NEET life. Of course, the thing is, I think a lot of NEETs, probably most actually, are sub 5. So if you are below average in terms of looks and you try to make a good life for yourself, you give it an honest effort, you try to study hard and make good grades so you can get a good job, and then you work hard at your job day in and day out. I know for me, even when I had that high-paying job, it was nice, like the money was nice, but it did not make women attracted to me. It did not help me make friends. It did not suddenly make customer service workers start treating me like a normal human being. It didn't fix my crippling, high inhibition social anxiety. I actually don't think I'm even that ugly compared to most NEETs. I don't know. A lot of people in my comments seem to think that I'm not even sub 5. So I don't know. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But all I know is I tried my best and I was somewhat successful. I did manage to get a pretty good job, but it didn't help with my social life at all, like romantically or just with friendships. The one and only thing that having a job ever did to improve my social life is that it made my parents happy. And even now with this car wash job, the biggest benefit is probably just that my parents have not been nagging me as much. And yes, I did somehow get a girlfriend that I met at work. I don't think that's typical for most former NEETs. And I'm pretty sure that just based on my whole life up to this point, that this is just a very lucky situation. So I don't think it really counts for much when we're doing the calculation of how beneficial wage cucking is to a person's social life. I mean, I guess it counts for something, but I'm pretty sure it's just pure luck. So for most people, if you have really bad social anxiety, which I think a lot of NEETs do, probably most NEETs do, then having a job is probably not going to improve your social life. A lot of people don't seem to understand this, but just putting yourself out there and frequently putting yourself in social situations, that might help some people, but it can also be bad for you. If you just get treated like garbage by everybody you talk to, then working at certain kinds of jobs, like working as a cashier or something, anything where you have to deal with a lot of customers, or even any job where you just have to talk to your own coworkers a lot, that's not going to be good for your social life if you are ugly or you're just very socially inept. Whatever the reasons are, if you tend to have bad experiences when you socialize with people, if you get a job where you have to socialize with people a lot, it's not going to improve your social life. It's going to be miserable. At best, it's going to be miserable. It could be traumatic. It could actually give you, like, you could have such bad experiences that it is traumatic for you. So don't just automatically assume that the Wagie life is better for your social life just because it forces you to go outside and socialize. I think it can be beneficial. It can be a positive in a lot of cases, but definitely not if it's a customer-facing position and you have social anxiety. That's not going to be good for your social life. And in fact, that is a recipe for disaster. Now, in terms of reputation, if you did somehow manage to meet a woman that's attracted to you, then it probably helps to have a good job compared to being unemployed living at your mom's house. But honestly, I don't think it really matters that much. If a woman finds you attractive, then it probably doesn't really matter what your job is. And it probably doesn't even matter if you have a job. And it's not like just any job is seen as cool by most people. You know, if you're a lawyer or a doctor or something like that, women will probably think that that's pretty cool, I guess. But if the only job you can get is working at McDonald's or moving boxes around in a warehouse, then that's not cool. You'd have better chances just telling a woman you're a NEET because most low-wage jobs are the opposite of cool. Women will think you're a loser if you work a job like that. At least if you're unemployed, you can maybe try to trick a woman into thinking that you have potential or something. I mean, realistically, that's not going to work either, but the point is, being a low-tier wage slave is not better for your reputation than just being unemployed. It's probably worse. It is nice to not have your family just constantly at your throat, nagging you about chores and whatever, like you're still a kid. So, for me personally, that is a nice benefit to the Wagie life. But your mileage may vary on that front. So, overall, do I prefer the NEET lifestyle or the Wagie life? Well, for me, I think the hybrid kind of lifestyle that I'm currently living is probably ideal. Of course, I'd rather work a high-paying, fulfilling job where I make enough money to live comfortably on my own and pay for everything I need, and I only have to work at most 40 hours a week. That would be ideal, but that's not really an option for me at this point. That job does not exist, but I think the part-time wagey life is all right. The way I'm living right now, it's all right. Especially considering, like I said, if I wasn't working at the car wash, it's not like all that time would be free time instead. If I wasn't working, I would have to be watching the baby. So for me, the trade-off isn't that different. For most of you, if you're a NEET and you don't have a baby to take care of, which is pretty much every NEET in the world, I'm probably the only NEET or semi-NEET, whatever you want to call me. I'm probably the only one in the world that is responsible for watching a baby. So for most people, there is a big trade-off between free time. So unless the money would really help you, like if you're literally walking around with holes in every pair of socks and you can barely afford a can of beans for dinner and you're just suffering in poverty, if that's your situation, then it probably is worth it to get a job. But if you're fortunate enough where you can live with your parents and your parents will support you, they'll cook you dinner, they'll buy you new socks when you need new socks, and they just support you like that, then in that case, I think wage cucking is only worth it if it's like a really high paying job, or maybe it's just a really easy job and it's not a lot of hours or something like that. Something like that might be worth it just to help you buy some more video games or whatever to help you cope. But for the most part, I think if you're living the NEET life, I wouldn't discourage anyone from trying working a job. If you've just been living NEET for 10 years, it's not like the worst thing in the world to give it a try. Try working a job if that's what you want to do. So I'm not trying to discourage anyone, but I also think if you're a long-time NEET, the options you'll have available to you right now for jobs that you could actually get, they're probably going to be pretty bad, probably not going to pay that much. You are going to lose out on a lot of free time that you currently have now as a NEET, and the money might be nice. You might make a little bit of money, which might be nice, especially if you're able to continue living at home. But ultimately, if you're living the NEET lifestyle and you've been doing that for a while, then I don't think working at McDonald's is really going to make you happier. If you want to try that, like I wouldn't discourage you from trying it. I think actually it can be a good thing to try things out from time to time. You could try it out and then quit after one day. You quit in the middle of your first shift if you just really hate it. It might be a bad experience, I guess, especially if you have social anxiety like I do, but it is what it is. It won't be the worst thing in the world to just try it out. But I also think for most people, it's probably just not worth it. So that's what I think. Ultimately, it depends on your situation. If your parents are pretty cool, if you have pretty chill parents that aren't nagging you constantly, and if they support you financially and they let you live in their house, that is pretty good. That's not bad. I don't know that your life would get better if you decided to become a wage slave. In most cases, it probably would not be any better. So that is the difference in the NEET lifestyle versus the life of a wage slave. If you enjoyed the video, please like the video, please subscribe to the channel, and thank you for watching.